Dr. Phil looked at the pension record. His eyes widened. He read it again. And said, Wait, this can't be right. The Dr. Phil Show. Stage 29. Another afternoon taping. Another family seeking answers. The cameras were rolling, the audience was settled, and everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Until Dr. Phil saw the second name on the pension document. The name that wasn't supposed to be there. The name that rewrote 60 years of family history in a single typewritten line. Eleanor Morrison sat in the beige guest chair, 78 years old, hands gripping the armrests like she was bracing for impact. She wore a simple cardigan and slacks, her white hair neatly styled, her face carrying the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets for decades. Beside her sat her son, David Morrison, 52 years old, a construction foreman from Des Moines. He'd brought his mother here hoping Dr. Phil could help them navigate a family dispute about her late husband's pension benefits. A straightforward financial issue. Estate planning. Nothing dramatic. Except the pension record Dr. Phil was holding told a completely different story. Eleanor, Dr. Phil said slowly, his usual commanding tone replaced by something more careful. I need you to help me understand something. This pension record from the railroad company. Your husband worked for Burlington Northern for 37 years, correct? Yes, Eleanor said quietly. From 1965 until he retired in 2002. And his name was Robert Morrison? Yes. Dr. Phil held up the document, pointing to a specific line. Then can you explain why this pension enrollment form from 1965 lists his name as Robert James Morrison, but also includes a second beneficiary name that I've never seen before? The studio went completely silent. Dr. Phil has reviewed thousands of documents over 20 years, but none of them created shock like this. The pension record had a hidden second name, and that name was changing the family's entire story. David leaned forward, squinting at the document from his chair. What second name? I don't understand. Dr. Phil turned the document toward them, his finger underlining a specific section. Right here. Under spousal beneficiary. It lists Eleanor Morrison. But there's another entry. From 1965 to 1973. Before Eleanor's name was added. Eleanor's face had gone completely pale. Her hands began to tremble. The name listed here. Dr. Phil continued, his voice gentle but insistent, is Catherine Werner. Wife. Beneficiary percentage, 100%. That entry was crossed out in 1973 and replaced with Eleanor's name. David stood up from his chair. What? That's impossible. My father married my mother in 1972. Before that he told us he was single. He said Mom was his first wife. Sit down, David, Dr. Phil said, not unkindly but firmly. Eleanor, I think you need to tell your son what happened. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slowly, as if she could somehow refuse this moment, push it back into the past where it had stayed hidden for 52 years. Mom? David's voice cracked. What is he talking about? Who is Catherine Werner? Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked not at her son but at Dr. Phil. You have to understand. It was different back then. Robert told me she was gone. He said the marriage was over. He said, Who is Catherine Werner? David repeated louder now. Your father's first wife. Eleanor whispered. The woman he was married to when I met him. The audience gasped. David fell back into his chair like he'd been pushed. Dr. Phil walked over to his desk and picked up another document. One the producers had pulled from public records once they'd seen the pension file. Eleanor, I have the marriage certificate. Robert James Morrison married Catherine Werner on June 12, 1964, in Omaha, Nebraska. And I have the divorce decree. Filed January 15, 1973. 9 years later. He turned to David. Your parents got married in April 1972. 9 months before your father's divorce was finalized. David's hands went to his head. No. No, that's not. They were married 50 years. They had a golden anniversary. I gave a speech about their perfect marriage. They were married 50 years. Dr. Phil said gently. But for the first 9 months, your father was technically married to 2 women at the same time. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1971. Robert Morrison was 29 years old, working as a freight conductor for Burlington Northern Railroad. He'd been married to Catherine Werner for 7 years. They had no children. Catherine couldn't have them, a source of quiet grief in their small Omaha apartment. The marriage wasn't terrible. It wasn't violent or cruel. It was simply empty. 2 people who had married young and realized too late they had nothing in common. Catherine worked as a bank teller. Robert worked the rails. They barely saw each other. When they did, they had nothing to say. Robert had asked for a divorce in 1970. Catherine had refused. Not because she loved him, but because divorce in 1970 Nebraska was complicated, expensive, and socially devastating. Her parents were Catholic. A divorce would shame the family. She told Robert to wait. Be patient. Maybe things would get better. They didn't get better. In the spring of 1971, Robert met Eleanor Davis at a railroad union social event. She was 26, a widow whose husband had died in a train accident 2 years earlier. She understood the railroad life. She understood loss. She was kind and warm and everything his marriage wasn't. They fell in love. Quickly. Completely. The kind of love that feels like fate. Robert told Eleanor about Catherine. He didn't hide it. He explained the situation. The marriage that was dead but not legally ended, his wife's refusal to divorce, his growing desperation to move forward with his life. I'm getting out, he promised Eleanor. I'm filing the papers. It's going to take time, but I'm getting out. Eleanor believed him. She believed him when he said the marriage was over. She believed him when he said Catherine knew it was finished. She believed him when he said they were just waiting for the paperwork. In April 1972, Robert took Eleanor to a small courthouse in Council Bluffs, Iowa, just across the state line from Omaha. They stood before a judge and got married. Eleanor became Eleanor Morrison. She didn't know, Robert never told her, that his divorce petition was still pending in Nebraska courts. That Catherine was contesting it. That legally, Robert was still married. 9 months later, the divorce was finally granted. Robert immediately filed amended paperwork with the railroad, replacing Catherine's name with Eleanor's on all his employment records, including his pension beneficiary form. The bigamy was technically brief, 9 months, and Robert rationalized it by telling himself the first marriage was already dead. It was just a matter of paperwork. Catherine had moved on. Eleanor never needed to know. But Eleanor did know. Of course she knew. She'd seen the divorce decree date. She'd done the math. For 52 years she'd carried the knowledge that for the first 9 months of her marriage, her husband had been married to another woman. She'd never told David. Never told anyone. Robert had asked her to keep it quiet. It doesn't change anything, he'd said. We're the real marriage. The other one was just paperwork. And Eleanor had agreed because she loved him and because speaking the truth meant admitting she'd married a man who was already married. When Robert died 3 years ago, Eleanor thought the secret had died with him. But then the pension dispute arose, David fighting with his cousins over benefit distributions, and the lawyers had requested all original railroad employment documents. And the original 1965 pension enrollment form had surfaced, with Catherine Werner's name, and Eleanor's name added later, and a clerical note in the margin. Beneficiary change, divorce decree filed January 15, 73. The lawyers had flagged it as irregular and sent it to Dr. Phil's producers, thinking it was simple bureaucratic confusion. They had no idea they were unearthing a 52-year-old secret. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. David was staring at his mother with an expression she couldn't quite read. Betrayal? Confusion? Hurt? You knew, he said finally. All these years. You knew Dad was married to someone else when he married you. It wasn't like that, Eleanor said desperately. He was getting divorced. We were waiting. You married him while he was married to another woman, David said flatly. That's bigamy, Mom. That's a crime. The marriage to Catherine was over, Eleanor insisted. They were separated. They were. Were they divorced? Dr. Phil interrupted gently but firmly. Eleanor closed her eyes. Not yet. Then they weren't separated, Dr. Phil said. They were married. And your husband married you while he was still legally married to her. The audience was leaning forward, every person riveted by this unfolding revelation. David stood up again, pacing behind his chair. This is insane. My whole childhood, you guys preached about honesty. About doing the right thing. About integrity. And meanwhile, you built your marriage on a lie. It wasn't a lie, Eleanor said, tears streaming now. We loved each other. The technicality didn't matter. It mattered to Catherine Werner, Dr. Phil said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Dr. Phil held up yet another document. I had my producers do some research. Catherine Werner, now Catherine Werner Hayes, is alive. She's 79 years old. She lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. And when our producers contacted her to verify the pension records, she told them something very interesting. Eleanor's face went from pale to gray. She told them, Dr. Phil continued, that she had no idea Robert had remarried until the divorce was final. She thought he was waiting, like they'd agreed. When she found out he'd married you 9 months before the divorce was granted, she was devastated. Not because she wanted him back, but because the bigamy invalidated certain financial settlements in the divorce. She lost money because of what Robert did. I didn't know that, Eleanor whispered. Maybe not, Dr. Phil said. But Robert did. And he never told you. And you never asked? David sat back down heavily. Does this mean, was their marriage even legal? If Dad was married to Catherine when he married Mom, does that mean the subsequent marriage was validated once the divorce was finalized? Dr. Phil said. Legally, your parents' marriage became valid in January 1973. Everything after that was legitimate. But for 9 months, yes, technically it wasn't legal. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. Dr. Phil set down all the documents and walked over to stand directly in front of Eleanor and David. He crouched slightly, bringing himself to eye level with them both. Here's what I need both of you to understand, he said, his voice losing all trace of television performance. Eleanor, you made a choice 52 years ago. You chose to marry a man who wasn't fully available. Maybe you rationalized it. Maybe you believed his promises. But you knew, on some level, that it wasn't quite right. And you've spent 5 decades carrying that knowledge like a weight on your chest. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. And David. Dr. Phil turned to him. You just found out your parents weren't perfect. That they made mistakes. That the foundation story of your family, the golden anniversary, the perfect marriage, had cracks you never knew about. And that's devastating. David wiped his eyes roughly. It feels like everything was fake. It wasn't fake, Dr. Phil said firmly. Your parents loved each other. They built a life together. They raised you. 52 years of real marriage. Real commitment. Real love. The fact that it started imperfectly doesn't erase 52 years of reality. He stood up and addressed the audience. How many of you have made mistakes? How many of you have done something you rationalized at the time but later realized was wrong? Dozens of hands went up slowly. And how many of those mistakes define your entire life? Or are they just chapters in a longer story? The hands stayed up, but nodding started throughout the audience. Dr. Phil turned back to Eleanor and David. Here's my advice. Eleanor, you need to stop carrying this like a shameful secret. You need to acknowledge that Robert put you in a terrible position, and you made a choice that had consequences you didn't fully understand. And you've paid for that choice with 52 years of fear that someone would find out. Eleanor was sobbing now, nodding. And David, you need to decide whether you're going to let this information destroy your image of your parents, or whether you're going to integrate it into a more complete, more honest picture of who they were. Flawed humans who loved each other and loved you. David looked at his mother for a long moment. Did he love her? Catherine? Eleanor shook her head. I don't think so. I think they were young and made a mistake. But he loved me. I know he loved me. And you loved him? With everything I had. David took a deep breath. Then I guess 52 years of real love matters more than 9 months of paperwork. He reached over and took his mother's hand. The audience rose to their feet, applauding not the revelation but the forgiveness. Dr. Phil stepped back, letting them have this moment of reconciliation. After the show, Dr. Phil did something unexpected. He arranged for Eleanor to speak with Catherine Werner by phone. Not for drama. For closure. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Catherine told Eleanor she'd moved on decades ago, married a good man, lived a good life. I'm not angry anymore, she said. We were all young and stupid once. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Eleanor kept the pension document. She framed it and hung it in her hallway with a small plaque beneath. Imperfect beginnings. Perfect ending. David visits his mother every Sunday. They talk about his father now, the real version, flaws and all. The relationship is stronger than it ever was built on the perfect lie. And somewhere in Lincoln, Nebraska, Catherine Werner watches Dr. Phil reruns and smiles, grateful that old secrets finally found the light.